Hello and welcome to this week's edition of The Pledge. You've probably heard the big news this week about the massive cluck-up as KFC ran out of chicken. Social media, unsurprisingly, laid into the chain. Staff were left cooped up as the company's decision to change delivery firm came home to roost. Among the battery of tweets, about the issue that's ruffled so many feathers, I know, guys, you'd probably assume we'd stoop low enough to make a joke out of the issue. We wouldn't fall foul of that one. Coming up, Greg thinks that the Mail on Sunday was wrong to print allegations about Brendan Cox. Afwell wants more money. For the arts, of course. Michelle says we need to decide what to do with the Brits who fought for ISIS, and Carol argues that Theresa May has finally got it right on something. One of the most illogical and outdated pieces of British law that currently exists is the ban on cannabis. Now, a mother is urging the government to allow her 6-year-old son to be treated with the drug for a rare form of epilepsy. Alfie Dingley suffers up to 30 fits a day, but his seizures were cut in number and severity when he was treated with the cannabis oil in the Netherlands. But ridiculously, his mum faces a 14-year jail sentence if she gives Alfie the oil in Britain. What is this poor mother to do? The war on drugs has failed. It's time to legalise cannabis for medicinal purposes, but also for recreational use. It will help the sick, raise taxes, undercut criminal gangs, and keep people safe. What's not to like?
Majid, I'm glad you raised the subject, and I agree with you. I think that this case of little Alfie is really heartbreaking, and it's very frustrating to know that there is a solution available that is not being offered here just because of, I think, outdated attitudes and bureaucracy. Now, I don't think we should be too dismissive about concerns about cannabis, but I think a lot of them are related to it being part of the underworld. You know, this idea that it leads on a downward spiral to harder and more dangerous drugs. I think there's lots of evidence in countries where it is regulated that actually that doesn't happen. I've just come back from California, where it's now outstripping agriculture as milk and dairy as one of the largest contributors to the economy. And in the US, where 9 states have legalised it, the medicinal cannabis market is worth more than $2 billion. So the potential is huge. But I just want to show you what Theresa May said about Alfie's case in the Commons this week.
I know that the sympathies of the members across the House are with Alfie and his family as he's undergoing treatment. And of course, people with chronic pain and debilitating illnesses, we recognise, will always look to alleviate their symptoms. But we do need to ensure that if we are going to if medicines are going to be permitted to be used, that they have been through the most rigorous testing, that we apply the most rigorous standards before those drugs are used.
This seems like a good moment to mention vaginas, because I don't know if any of you saw the story this week. I don't know if any of you saw the story this week, but these vaginal meshes that have been widely used on women who've given birth to treat incontinence have not been properly tested, and yet they've been used on women. And the idea that cannabis, where so much research has been done, that it's been talked about as a potential legal substance for so long, and we're depriving this child of something that could help him, and quite happily inserting these untested meshes into women. So I feel that there's a real double standard.
Can we talk about why it's not legalised in this country? And the reason is that cannabis is made up of 400 different chemicals. Before anything in this country is legalised for medicinal use, the chemicals have to be pure single chemicals, because what you have to do is monitor the effect, that you have to be able to monitor the effect that the drug has on you. And that's why it is not legal in this country. Also, cannabis has more carcinogens than tobacco in it. But you just mentioned California there. One of the biggest studies on cannabis in the entire world has just been conducted out there. It's the National Academy of Science, Engineering and Medicine. And it says it is warning of the very aggressive downsides of some cannabis use. They're talking about schizophrenia, schizophrenia, psychosis, respiratory problems. People taking cannabis have more car crashes than the average person. Now, while I get that Alfie's parents are devastated about this, I get it. If I had a child, I'd want to give it anything out there that was possible. But we can't, you know, by legalising something, you are saying it's not dangerous. And we can't say that about cannabis, because we know it can be very dangerous.
Carol, there's so many assumptions in what you've just said.
Tell me what are the assumptions?
Let's start with this one. By legalising something, you're saying it's not dangerous. That's simply not true. Nobody's saying that alcohol is not dangerous. Nobody's saying is that tobacco is
so
not
do we
dangerous.
want to compound the damage?
No, hold on. So we're talking about regulating an industry. The studies you've cited, this is why it's so incredibly frustrating for me, because the debate around cannabis and its legalization and regulation is so culturally biased. It's unbelievable. Studies prove, now Lancet in 2010, a peer-reviewed medical journal, basically demonstrated that by all criteria that you could possibly consider, tobacco and alcohol are far worse for you, are far more dangerous for society, produce far more crime than the legalization of cannabis would. As for road traffic incidents, where it has been legalized in Colorado State, in Washington State, in Oregon and in Alaska, they found not only did teen use of cannabis remain the same, crime went down and road traffic incidents were not affected.
Yeah, surely, I mean, we're ending up just arguing, throwing stats at each other, aren't we, and trying to argue that. I mean, what is clear about this country is that we've got our drugs policy. We've got what? There's no doubt about it.
Drugs has failed.
There are
There's
now.
been no
It's
war
failed.
on drugs. There hasn't
Of course there's been a war on drugs.
Carol, please, just let somebody else say something. What we've seen for years, I mean, cannabis has been in use by many, many people in this country for years. And actually, that brings the law into disrepute, really, because actually it's ignored. And even the police now ignore it.
That's why there hasn't been a war on drugs.
What I would say to Alfie's mum is, you can obtain this, do it. No one's going to take any action. I've got a mate at the moment who is suffering. I've got a mate who has been diagnosed with cancer, who is taking liquid cannabis every day because he believes it will help.
I don't think we should encourage people to break the law. Also, because child services may get involved. The problem is the law, and I really feel for her. And actually, the problem is that she could face 14 years in jail for treating her suffering child.
She won't get 14
Carol,
years in
what are we
jail.
going to do?
When was the
Encourage her
last
to break
time
the law?
anyone was put into jail for cannabis, imagine? It just doesn't
But when was the
happen.
last time children were taken away from parents for drug consumption? That is a danger.
It won't happen. And
So what, are we telling her to disrespect the law? Is that what we're saying?
The cops turn a blind eye.
Michelle, come on, you can.
Right, so I am very anti-recreational drugs for personal reasons. I don't like them. But I've spent a lot of time looking into cannabis, and I've reached the conclusion that actually it should be legalised. Now, firstly, to make it legal for medicinal purposes, that's not a change to law, it's a rescheduling of the drug to move it from Schedule 1 to Schedule 2. That's the first thing that could happen very simply and very easily, to allow that drug to remain illegal for street use, for example, but legal for medicinal purposes. That's the first thing I think should happen, and cases like Alfie, etc., just demonstrate that again to me. When it comes to recreational use, one of the challenges, and I've had personal experience of somebody that's had very bad mental health issues because of cannabis use, but the type of cannabis that he was using was skunk. It was a very, very potent, strong form of cannabis. If you legalised cannabis, you could actually have controls around simplifying it, essentially the ingredients of cannabis. You could apply taxation to it on a gradual level, so just bear with me. So you could tax it at a gradual level in the way of alcohol, so the stronger and more potent the cannabis, the higher the price, the higher the taxation, the higher the price. So you could essentially create like if you've got shandy at one level of alcohol and then you've got vodka or tequila or whatever at the other end, you could have like a sliding scale, the lowest potency of cannabis being, cheaper and therefore much accessible to people to use. So I think that adults should be able to use cannabis for recreational choice if they wish. And there's a really interesting think tank called Voltfast, which looks into this, and they absolutely bang the drum for this. And if you read some of their stuff, it's fascinating, and they've changed my view on it.
The second reading of the bill is tomorrow, actually, in Parliament. Labour MP Paul Flynn proposed a bill. Its second reading for medicinal purposes, it's called the Legalisation of Cannabis Medicinal Purposes Bill, is read tomorrow. And Norman Lamb, who was quite a good health minister by all accounts, made the very point you've made about the dangers of not knowing what's in the drug if it remains illegal, whereas by regulating it, let's just hear what he had to say. Let's just hear what Norman Lamb had to say.
If you're buying in a criminal market, you have no idea what you're buying. You have no idea of the potency of what you're buying, how dangerous it is. It's so much safer. It protects young people so much more if we can regulate it in a sensible and rational way.
Now, alcohol and tobacco are both bad for adolescents and people that are still developing, likewise with cannabis, but there's no proven long-term effect on adults when they consume cannabis.
I've been trying to make this point for ages. Yeah. But the point about, does anybody actually believe around this table that if you legalise cannabis or any other drug, that the drug dealers are going to suddenly become model citizens overnight? They are not, because what's going to happen if the government starts selling it, if we start taxing it, the drug dealers are going to be there and they're going to undercut the price and they're going to bring stuff in that they have now, and the dangers will still be the same.
We have a precedent for that, and of course I know Afua, you want to come back on something, but we have a precedent on that, and that is prohibition. And at the end of the day, when alcohol was banned, crime spiralled out of control, and when prohibition was lifted, it was brought back into control again. Crime never went away, but it is
Mafia never went away either.
It is certainly reduced when you pull the rug from under the feet of the gangsters.
But I just feel that this is a bit of a false comparator, because we're comparing cannabis to alcohol and other drugs, but we're talking about cannabis for medicinal use. And Carol, you know, you raised the fears about side effects. We should be comparing cannabis for medicinal use to other drugs that are used to treat health conditions, many of which have extremely dangerous and debilitating side effects. And when we use substances for medicinal purposes, we accept that they do have side effects and they cause other health risks. That's the balance. Think about chemotherapy,
you know,
and how damaging that is to your health. Now, sometimes you need to be able to conduct a rational cost-benefit analysis of what you can get from a drug versus the cost, and that's what we should be doing.
With other drugs, you know what the side effects are going to be.
And we will if it's regulated.
Should the Mail on Sunday have published their front-page story in which the husband of Joe Cox, the murdered Labour MP, was accused of sexually inappropriate behaviour? Even if the story is true, haven't Brendan Cox and his 2 young children suffered enough? Was it really in the public interest for the paper to tell the world the man had left his senior job at Save the Children back in 2015 because of these accusations? Of course, no one should behave inappropriately. But if his wife hadn't been a murdered MP and the Oxfam story hadn't been in the headlines, the story of Brendan Cox wouldn't have warranted more than a couple of paragraphs in a local paper. Instead, it dominated the news. This was a completely unnecessary story for the paper to run.
OK, there's a couple of simple truths here. Sex abuse is always wrong. Abuse of power is always wrong. Of course, this story should have been reported in light of the current charity sex scandals and the cover-ups that have gone with that. Brendan Cox suffered the most horrific tragedy imaginable. I get that. I get that his children should never have had to suffer what happened to their mum. However, he cannot be given a free pass on allegations of sex abuse because no one else has. And what has upset me this week is the voices, very high-profile female voices that, when the scandal at Westminster was happening, were shouting for the heads of MPs who might have grazed the knee of a woman that they knew. The same people were shouting for the heads of rich men at the President's Club dinner for allegedly abusing women. And here you seem to be saying that Brendan Cox should have a free pass because of what tragically happened to his wife. I have no doubt whatsoever that Brendan Cox is a fantastic father. No doubt whatsoever. But, you know, no one is talking about the victims of his alleged offences in this. We're talking about how he should be left alone. Let's just hear Jess Phillips, who was very vociferous about abuse elsewhere.
What Brendan has done this morning and the statements that have been released over the weekend show that he's willing to face the things that he may have done, or that certainly how they've made people feel, and what he, I'm sure, never wanted to do was to drag any of the work that those of us who wish to carry on the work of Joe through any sort of controversy.
That, to me, I have huge respect for Jess Phillips, but that, for me, is rank hypocrisy, because I heard her talking about other alleged sex abuses, and here she's saying that because of what happened to him, because he's a good and decent man, we shouldn't be talking about this. Of course we should. It's part of a very big scandal currently.
But he's only on the front page of the Mail on Sunday. No, listen. Well, no, you haven't listened to what I said. You can't say
I know what you're
no.
going to say.
Well, if you know what I'm going to say, we shouldn't have a debate show.
You said it in the intro.
No, what I'm saying is it was only because it was on the front page of the Mail on Sunday that it then dominated the news for 24 hours at least. It was the lead story on the BBC. Who wouldn't have run the story if it had been theirs?
Why do you think it shouldn't have been in the light of everything that's happening with
because I
charities?
think when you're an editor of a programme or you're an editor of a newspaper, you make judgments, and sometimes you say, this person has suffered enough.
What about the victims in I want to come back. What about the victims in this alleged offences that Brendan Cox found? No one is. If I was one of those, his so-called alleged victims, I would be incandescent with rage that everyone is talking about what a great guy he is, and no one's talking about what he is allegedly done to them.
I'm so pleased, Carol, that you have finally found compassion for the victims, because I've had at least 2 debates with you on this show where I've been saying exactly what you've been saying, and by the way, I completely agree with you on this. I've been saying exactly what you've been saying, that this is completely unacceptable, that we need to have zero tolerance to sexual abuse and harassment, that we should be talking about the victims instead of these poor men in positions of power.
I don't think I've ever said poor men in power should be allowed to abuse women after.
About the President's Club, you were very, in my opinion, and I'm sure you'll disagree, very dismissive of the women in the President's Club and the experience
the women in the President's Club knew what they were getting into.
And when we talk
the women
about
who were working for Save the Children that Brendan Cox allegedly abused did not ask for that to happen.
If that means you are now on side of someone with zero tolerance to sexual abuse,
that's just being sarcastic and silly.
I'm genuinely happy that you've come on board. I agree with you. I think that to hear Jess Phillips, who was very strong and unequivocal in her condemnation of other men in power, to be to be so forgiving of Brendan Cox, for me that is hypocrisy, and I'm really disappointed by people on the left for having a double standard. I disagree with you, Greg. I think that the reason that Brendan Cox deserves a higher level of scrutiny is not because he's a grieving widower, and we all had such compassion for that. It's because he's in a position of power. He's been chairing 2 charities in her name. People have been giving money. If you want to accept that kind of responsibility, you need to accept you come under a high level of scrutiny.
I think we need to just see what his response has been, to be fair to him. So this is what Brendan Cox says in response to the allegations. He says that I do acknowledge and understand that during my time at Save the Children, I made mistakes and behaved in a way that caused some women hurt and offence. This was never malicious, but it was certainly inappropriate. In the past, I focused on disputing what I felt was untrue in the allegations, but I realise now that it's more important to take full responsibility for what I have done. I'm committed to holding myself to much higher standards of personal conduct in the future. I think that one of the things I'm tired of, and actually, to be fair, I think the only one who's spoken so far, Michelle's yet to speak on this topic, but I think Afua has been consistent here in condemning sexual abuse and harassment from all sides of the political spectrum. And I'm going to try and be consistent as well, but come down on a slightly different side to you on this debate and say, I have consistently said that there's a line that the newspapers, I believe, have crossed between treating sexual harassment seriously and between trying to spin this whole thing to turn a profit. And I think that line was crossed with the President's Club, and I think it's crossed with Brendan Cox, because I think they're overstating all of this stuff just because they know that currently it's the go-to story in the news, and they want to sell newspapers.
That's how newspapers work.
Michelle, but that doesn't mean
I'm tired of it being used, sexual harassment being used as a political football, because Toby Young was treated to the same thing by the left.
It's a relevant story.
Michelle.
Well, I think that the paper was right to do this story, and the reason why, so you said you felt it wasn't in the public interest. The reason that I feel it is in the public interest is because Brendan Cox is a person who's chosen to take a platform and to use, and again, I feel like I need to reiterate, of course, I've got sympathy for what happened, it's very tragic, but what he took off the back of that was to create a platform for himself and to use that platform to tell a lot of people how they should be conducting themselves. Now, I have no problem with that. You can tell people how to conduct yourself all you want, but if you're going to do that, you should be making sure that you are also conducting yourself in a good way. Now, what I would say is, when there are allegations that perhaps somebody hasn't been, you deserve to know that. That to me, is in the public interest.
Well, it would be quite interesting to ask male group newspapers, for instance, but let's just take the one. They ran this story, so it'd be interesting to ask most organisations, how many allegations of sexual harassment have they had in their organisations?
Yeah, but this is what I'm saying. The subject has been weaponised. Now, we're talking about the Mail at the moment with Brendan Cox, but likewise, when this happened to Toby Young, it was the left-wing press.
Yes.
And frankly, I do remember...
And he wasn't accused of abuse.
But Carol, Afwa's right. I do remember when we discussed the President's Club, you were saying that this The Financial Times has just run with this story.
I really resent you two trying to say that I think it's okay to abuse women. I don't, and I have never said anything close to that.
And I haven't suggested you've said that either.
No.
What I'm saying is I believe the subject is being weaponised politically, and that's what I find disgusting. This subject should be treated with a cross-party, non-partisan approach, and it's a serious subject.
You know,
unfortunately, people on the left want to use it to...
what you're saying, Majid. You're saying it's a serious subject on which I agree.
And I've said you're the only one that I've heard is consistent on it.
Thank you. But I don't understand why you're saying that newspapers are kind of exploiting it. It's an important story. We've had, in my lifetime, this has been normalised. I've worked in the international development sector. I have experienced sexual abuse in the international sector, and I've seen it being completely dismissed, pushed to the side, covered up. And so for me, it is high time people are held to a normal standard of accountability. And that's the newspapers are an appropriate...
Can somebody else talk on this? We keep on being told that he has apologised to these women. What I read in the Sunday paper was that he apologised, but then he said, my recollection of what I did was not their recollection of what I did. And having already said that a lot of these so-called abuses were carried out when he'd had a drink, how can he say that? So he's apologised on the one hand to his victims, on the other hand he's taking it back and saying they're exaggerating.
To be fair to him, he's saying that he's recognised that's wrong now. He's saying in the past I focused on disputing what I felt was untrue in the allegations, but I realise now it's more important to take full responsibility.
And this is a wider issue. Can I just bring in Yvette Cooper, who I think rightly said that this is a bigger problem than Brendan Cox?
There's a wider issue here that I think hopefully we are seeing a change now in the climate and in culture where people are recognising that those in positions of power should not abuse positions of power. Those who end up becoming the victims of harassment should have support to speak out, and there should be systems in place that allow this to be dealt with and sorted out and not allow things to just drag on and continue to cause real problems.
And that's the kind of message that I would like to come out of this, that we could actually see change, because this is about women at the end of the day who've experienced abuse and harassment.
We are going to see change, don't you think?
I hope so.
As a result of what has gone on, we are going to see change. I was just making
I
the point of somebody who I think has suffered.
The whole topic will be destroyed if we weaponise it and politicise it.
Okay,
I agree. It isn't left and right. It is
time to move on. And I was thrilled to see the talented actor Daniel Kaluuya win a BAFTA last weekend for his role in the horror film Get Out. Young actors like him are playing a big role in raising the profile of British talent around the world. But the real horror story is the way arts funding in the UK, which has enabled talent like him to come from very humble beginnings, is being decimated by year after year of cuts. I was lucky enough to be at the BAFTAs, and it was truly moving how time and time again award winners took to the stage to praise the public sector funding that gave them opportunities against the odds and to warn how few opportunities exist now. If we're serious about Britain being a global nation with presence and influence on the world stage, then why are we so comfortable with the demise of our creative sectors? We won't notice how important it is until it's too late.
I mean, but to be fair, in the last big round of cuts, the Arts Council didn't get cut. The government decided not to cut them. They cut them in the years before, but they didn't cut them in the last round. But
you're going to force me to bring in the statistics.
No, I'm not about statistics. They were not cut in the last round. I can tell you, I was chairman of the British Film Institute.
We want to kill them off.
Part of the problem is actually local authorities who also used to fund the arts are being squeezed, and are squeezed to such an extent that almost they can get nothing. You can get nothing from local authorities. But the Arts Council, the other big issue, the Arts Council is gradually shifting its policy. I don't think fast enough to say, actually, we spend too much on the arts in London and not enough in the rest of the country. And that's become worse because of local authorities being cut.
I agree.
I agree with you in the sense that the creative industries are an important part of the economy and of the culture of this country. And that should be reflected in our spending. Now, to be fair to George Osborne, I think he did reflect that in the last set of cuts.
OK, let's just quickly, before I bring everyone else in, look at the statistics, because you're right, Greg, that Arts Council England funding is not as diabolical as, on these statistics as you might think. So since between 2010 and 2016, England Arts Council funding was down 3.6%. Real terms art spending in Scotland for Creative Scotland was down 11% and Wales down 12%.
Yep.
But the reason I don't think that's the full picture is, as you said, local authorities have been hammered. Some have been threatening to reduce their cultural funding by 100%. And they've had 17% overall reduction in budgets. And that's hit grassroots art. So, you know, the National Theatre, the Barbican, the Royal Shakespeare Company, they've consistently had public sector funding. But if you look at grassroots community organisations and actually the kind of projects that give young people like Daniel Kaluuya a foot up, they're the ones that have been decimated. And the other source of funding that is important in the arts is the EU. We've had more than £1 billion funding from the EU, and films like Slumdog Millionaire could never have been made were it not for EU funding. Now, what I'm saying is, how are the British government going to compensate for this huge gap in the arts budget when we leave Europe? Because I'm not saying we can't do it alone, but I would like to see a plan for it, and I haven't seen anything resembling.
The reality is that we live in a country...
I was just going to read a response to it. Yeah, just forgive me a minute. I'm not the spokesperson for the Department for Culture, Media and Sports, but they did. Yeah, here we are. We're going to have to read their defence of this situation, though I agree with Afua. Right, so what they've said, if we have a look at this, they said the UK is a creative powerhouse, developing and producing award-winning films and TV enjoyed by millions globally. We are determined to see this fantastic success continue, which is why £70 million of government and national lottery cash was invested in the British film industry last year. On top of that, our tax reliefs for the creative industries are among the best in the world and have helped attract more than £11 billion of investment since 2007. That's from the DCMS, and that party political broadcast is now over.
Can I talk about the Warwick Commission, which I'm sure you know about, which found that all the state and lottery-funded arts projects were accessed by a very narrow, social, economic, educated group, and that's the middle classes, and that's the bottom line in this country. The arts they're a glorious luxury, but they're not enjoyed by the working classes. You mentioned Daniel Kaluuya. He's one of the lucky ones, but generally, you know, 87% of all the free museum passes in this country are taken up by the middle classes, not by the poor. And to hear, you know, you're talking there, you sounded so terribly rich and privileged and middle class there. I'm at the BAFTAs and we're talking about how we can fund the arts.
Actually, I was talking about grassroots organisations.
The reality is we live in a country, Apple, where people are dying in hospital corridors, where old people are dying at home alone because there is no money to fund the social care budget. You know, we have councils closing down because of lack of money. Public services closing down.
Councils closing down?
Yes, councils are closing in this country. Councils are closing.
I'm not sure if you've heard anything I said, Carol. I'm talking about the funding for elite institutions remains. What I'm talking about is grassroots organisations.
Where is the money?
Not middle class people in London.
We're told not to talk over each other.
What you're saying is not related to what I'm saying.
Where is the money going to come from? The money, we need money. I would rather money go into the health and the social care of this country than into the arts, which is enjoyed by the privileged.
I just need to correct something. I do not think councils are closing down. Which
Should we just tell him? Nottinghamshire is on the brink of bankruptcy, as is Surrey. Northamptonshire is on the brink of bankruptcy.
Councils are not closing down.
They're on the brink. OK, so let me rephrase.
You might want to say they're on the brink.
Michelle, why don't you give us a view from Hull.
2 years ago, I would have looked at you and I would have rolled my eyes. I'd have thought, you're just a London bubble, who cares about the arts and all the rest of it. I promise you, I would have been on your side, I'd have rolled my eyes, I'd have just gone, whatever, London thing. Last year, you've just pointed out I'm from Hull.
Then you moved to London.
Last year, Hull was awarded the City of Culture status, right? Yeah. And what I've seen, and to your point, health and all the rest of it is very important in this country, but we're also in a situation where it's on the front page news today, more people on antidepressants. You know, we're a very lonely nation, all the rest of it. What I've seen happen to my city as a result of the City of Culture has been incredible. I've got goosebumps just thinking about it. I've been at so many events in the Hull city centre where I've seen working class guys, my family, my friends. If you could see their face, I promise you, I'm goosebumpy. If you could see our faces, we're in our town and all around us, we've got lights, we've got music, we've got production. You've got men in their 70s who would have gone, culture, bloody hell's culture. Yeah. These guys are like, wow, it's brought our community together. It's brought 9 out of 10 residents onto the streets, engaging in arts. So now I'm actually a surprised fan of investing in the arts. I think it brings us together, it makes us happier, it makes us healthier, and I think that we should continue funding it. I would challenge your point slightly, because I need to disagree with you a little bit, or else I'll be confused.
We'll be worried.
I would say that when I think of EU funding, I do actually see that as our own money being recycled and given back to us. So I never get worried about what's going to happen. I'd like to see a plan in place for continual thing, but I don't see exiting the EU as something that should significantly damage that.
I'd like to add, I'm not so sure that it's accurate to say that working class people don't enjoy the arts, because whether it's...
Said it with the word accessible to them.
Well, it is. Well, the television made it accessible to everybody, and I think that to assume, not that you did assume, but to assume that only middle-class people enjoy the arts is to completely
Didn't
ignore...
say that. This is total...
I just said you didn't say that.
I said they're accessible to the middle class. So why even say it in the same breath?
Well, because I'm issuing a government health warning to everybody else out there. I said you didn't say it. I'm saying that to assume, if one were to assume, that it is solely a middle-class pursuit, knowing that you didn't say that...
What did you say?
...is dangerous. Hold on, can I just finish my point?
I thought that's what Carol said.
Right, so what I'm saying is,
sounded
Carol,
like a middle-class person
is that
because
I'm sure lots of working-class people, I know for a fact, right, enjoy watching the arts on television. They watch TV shows, they watch films, and our actors have been punching way above their weight when it comes to the Oscars, when it comes to Hollywood films. And actually, it's those from working-class backgrounds that are doing the best at the moment. Idris Elba, Kahlua, who just won...
And that was the whole point of...
Right? I think that we've got to invest in that because of the points that Michelle was making.
There is one issue, and that is that the arts have been propped up in this country by the lottery.
Yeah.
And the number of people buying lottery tickets is going down, and therefore the amount of money available is going down, and that is a serious issue.
Well, anyway, it's time for the break, and hopefully you guys at home will be taking in some arts. When we're back, I'll be asking my fellow panellists what on earth we should be doing to hold Brits who fought for ISIS to account. Scum. That's how I regard the two ISIS jihadis captured in Syria in January. Caught only after they'd conducted kidnapping, beheading and torture. The question now is what happens to them and where? All of my emotions tell me the only thing for them is to tie them to a pole in Wembley Stadium and sell tickets and let people do whatever they want to them. However, my logic says that death is the outcome they crave, to die a martyr for their warped cause. How does that mean that justice was done? Bringing them back to the UK and imprisoning them here will cost us taxpayers millions. And besides, if they're no longer UK citizens, why are they our problem? Should this fall to The Hague as a matter of an international war crime? I don't know. For once, I'm truly stumped.
So Michelle, as for the emotions you expressed, I'm with you entirely. These two and the other two that were with them only engender in me an absolute and total disgust, not least because they do what they do in my name and people like me in the name of Islam. In fact, I'm so disgusted that one of the most frustrating things is, and I used to be guilty of it myself, when the media used to refer to them as the Beatles, because actually I think that completely understates the seriousness of what they do. It makes a mockery of one of our best British musical exports. They should be called ISIS Execution Cell. That's what they were. They were executing innocent people and torturing them, as you said. And so it's absolutely, I think, unfortunate that they've, basically this moniker has been developed for them, which actually really does kind of sell short the seriousness and the gravity of what they've done. Now, the problem with the trial situation is this. I'm not so concerned of what they want. They may well want to die and become martyrs. Frankly, I don't give a damn what they want. What I care about is who we are and what we represent. And I think that part of the problem in the so-called war on terror is so often, too often, we have compromised on what we represent as the moral high ground in challenging these scum. I think Guantanamo Bay, I think the invasion of countries, I think a resorting to arbitrary execution ourselves through drone strikes and torture in some instances has also meant that we've fallen short in the reasons, the very reasons we're morally disgusted at them, and we as a state and a country have sometimes fallen foul of those same moral quagmires. So I think as a result, we need to use this as an opportunity to reassert what we we stand for, which is the rule of law, democracy and justice, and bring them to trial. Now, the problem with trial is that the Americans have Guantanamo as an option. I don't think that should be an option, nor does the former reviewer of government terrorism legislation, Lord Carlisle. And of course, they don't recognise the jurisdiction of the ICC, the International Criminal Court, which leaves us with one option, and one option alone, and that is to try them in Britain. And one of the things I find so sad is a bit like parents of radicalised terrorists who are absolutely in denial when they find out that their children have committed acts of terrorism. They say, my son would never do something like that. No, my son... And then when they realise their son has done something like that, they completely disavow them rather than take responsibility. I think sometimes our country falls prey to that as well. We've got to face up to the fact that these executioners for ISIS, all 4 of them, were produced in Britain. Something's going wrong in our communities. Something's going wrong with the state of integration in this country. Something's going wrong within Muslim communities, to be more specific. And we've got to own that. And as a result of owning it, I think we've got to try them in this country and take responsibility for what we sent to the rest of the world.
I want to, I'm interested in everybody else's opinion, but I'm more so interested in yours. So before I move on to everybody else, you said about what we've created in this country and delivered to the rest of the world. I'm trying to think of a sensitive way to bring up what I'm about to bring up, and I'm failing, so I'll just say it bluntly.
Say it, it's fine, yeah.
Wasn't you arrested and detained for a very long time in Egypt for links to Islamist extremism?
Yeah, a group that remains legal in this country. But, so to make that very clear, there was no hint of or no suggestion of violence by the Egyptian government. We were detained as Amnesty International adopted prisoners of conscience for having ideas that were against the Egyptian state. Those ideas that I now...
What changed your mind? How did you change? How do we... Because what I'm fascinated about, before I bring everyone else in, I hate these 2 people. I hate what they've done, what they stand for. Is it possible to change those 2 people's minds? And very briefly, how do we do that?
Well, it is possible, but it's incredibly inefficient and highly unlikely, and especially when you cross that line. And that's why I began by saying that we never crossed a line into violence. We had reprehensible ideas that I've now dedicated the rest of my life to, the last 10 years, challenging, as you know. But when you cross that line into violence, first of all, the criminal justice system has to kick in. And second of all, just statistically, it's a lot harder to bring somebody back from that, and demonstrably, it isn't working at the moment. Last thing I'll say, Greg, last thing I'll say. So that's why the best focus is on prevention rather than treatment. And we've got to look at how to stop people becoming these sorts of monsters again in the future.
Can I just, maybe I can just show a clip. One of the people who was executed by these guys was a guy called James Foley, and his mother has talked about what should happen to them. It's worth watching.
Well, I would prefer a federal criminal court, be that in the UK or the US or The Hague, just some country that would be capable to do a public, fair trial.
There is a thought that these men may go straight to Guantanamo Bay. What would your reaction be if that happened?
I would be very against that. It would continue the hatred. Part of, you know, they were executed in orange jumpsuits like used in Guantanamo.
I mean, I agree with you in some ways that it's abhorrent to us all that they would come back here, but where else do they go? And that's the problem. There's almost nowhere else from the... They were British citizens. I think there's still some dispute about whether they are British citizens. If they're going to be tried, they probably should be tried here. But the idea that we're then going to pay to keep them in prison here for the next 30, 40 years
and isn't this
terrible.
The point, you know, the war crimes in Bosnia, we were talking about this before the show, you know, people are still being tried in The Hague now at a huge cost. I don't want a single penny of British taxpayers' money, and these cases would go on for years because we have to gather the evidence, we have to bring it all together. It will cost millions and millions of pounds and take years. And then we put them in prison and they will have to be segregated from other people. I wish that these people had been killed on the battlefield.
Yes, but
they're not. Okay, so I don't want them back in this country. I'm unequivocal. I don't want them back here.
Do you want?
So
what do I want? I want someone else to take care of them. I don't see why we should. But what do you mean it's easy? They either go to prison here and taxpayers in this country pay millions of pounds to keep them, or they don't. Yeah, well, I don't care. I don't want them here. I don't.
You know, but this is why I think this is a fascinating...
Gavin Williamson said, our Defence Secretary said, you know, a dead terrorist is not a threat, and that's what I feel.
I respect your view, in that I fundamentally and strongly disagree with it. But I think to have it coming from a government minister is really worrying, because our government doesn't have the option of just abrogating their responsibility and saying it's someone else's problem. I completely agree with you, Majid. I think that this is emotionally, it's difficult to accept, but a democracy is something that comes with privileges and responsibilities. You don't just get to opt out of criminal justice when you don't want to pay for it or when it's inconvenient. And it's interesting, and you played James Foley's mother, also Nicolas Henin, who is also a victim of this group, said he wanted to see them on a fair trial. That's what victims want, and I can see why. They want justice, because that is the appropriate way to deal with people guilty of such terrible
ISIS
atrocities.
are very big on justice, aren't they?
Do you see us as equivalent to ISIS, though? Because I see us as far superior.
Well, we are far superior.
So that's why we should be showing our moral superiority.
And I don't think taxpayers' money should be spent on.
We should just refer to what the Home Secretary has said, who I imagine this decision will partly come down to her. So let's see what Amber Rudd had to say.
What we're looking at is making sure that they do face justice, they do face the full force of the law for their terrible crimes. And we're working with the Americans to find out how that will be done.
If they don't come to the UK, what are the realistic options are there?
Well, I'm not going to be drawn on those two particular individuals.
Have they been stripped of their citizenship?
I'm afraid I can't comment on that.
Now, that's a more responsible statement than Gavin Williamson. And I've just got to say on the citizenship question, the jury is out as to whether they are still citizens. But the law in the UK currently doesn't allow the state to render anyone stateless. And one of these in particular, it looks like by his name, Alexander Coty, isn't from a different country and therefore probably converted to the religion and therefore probably can't be rendered have his passport taken away because he wouldn't have any other state. And therefore we are probably obliged in this situation to repatriate these two individuals. And yes, ISIS doesn't stand for justice, but that's what I meant. I think we do.
I think justice in this country will amount to a lot of time in jail.
We've got to stop dumping our toxic waste
One last point, really quickly.
people.
Three-quarters of the people who've been convicted of terrorist offences since 9/11 are now being released. We have got to solve this. We don't have the option. There are people now on our streets who we have not de-radicalised, and that is a problem we can't duck.
OK, you're watching The Pledge on Sky News. I'm up next, and I think Theresa May has got it right on universities. So finally, Theresa May did something right. She blew out of the water the myth that university is the best and only choice for today's school leavers. She also blasted greedy universities that charge maximum fees for useless degrees, which are never going to get students a job, which will land them with a 50 grand debt. And she's right, not every teenager wants or is suited to university, yet they are pushed into it, often by their parents. And there's still the perception that the smart kids go to university, the not so smart take up a trade. Which is why society still looks down on those not in glam or high status jobs and makes them feel like lesser beings, apologetic for what they do. And that's wrong, because all work is noble. Anyone who turns out every day to do something or to make something is doing a great thing. It's time we accepted that happiness and security isn't about university degrees or high-status jobs. It's about young people doing what they want and feeling valued for it.
I completely agree with you on pretty much every point you just made there. I do feel we have an obsession with universities, and I do feel that too many parents see success in their children as being, I know I've succeeded as a parent when I've got my child into university, full stop. Now, university, they're wonderful institutions, and they have, very many causes and benefits and all the rest of it. And for example, if I want to be a brain surgeon, you bet your bottom dollar I need to get myself to university and I need to study, and that's the right path. So I'm not knocking university. But what I am challenging is the fact that they have just become the default mechanism and measure of success. And I feel so strongly about this that I've joined a group of schools called University Technical Colleges for 14 to 19-year-olds, because what I think we need to do is intercept education before you get to school leave age. And you need to start changing the way you teach children technology and all the STEM subjects. You need to get employers engaged into the education. So for me, the whole thing needs to shake up, which is why I do the work that I do. But specifically on university, I agree, we need to remove the snobbery. Yeah. And I would go as far as saying that actually, if someone wants to go into a field that we really need them, i.e. NHS, nurses and doctors and all the rest of it, I would be comfortable with not charging those people fees or massively subsidising those fees on the basis that they actually commit to staying within the NHS, otherwise they're responsible for repaying those fees if they chose to leave.
Yeah. I think you have to look here and say, look, what was her speech about? Her speech was about she got unnerved in the last election when the Labour Party said they were going to scrap fees and found loads of people were going to vote for it. I mean, I personally, and I think, therefore, I don't think they've got a strategy at all yet. Hopefully they'll get one. I went to university when I was 24. I didn't have the proper qualifications you need to go. I went to the University of York, and I tell you, it fundamentally...
What did you study?
I studied politics. And
oh,
it fundamentally changed my life. And I would say to most of the people, if you can go, go. But where I agree with you is that isn't the only...
How did it fundamentally change your life?
How did it fundamentally change my life? Because I learnt about analysis and I learnt about thinking about things in a different way. Up to then, I've been a journalist.
Would you accept, though, that some universities now, and there are some incredible, I'm not saying intellectual, excellence should be stymied in any which way, but there are lots of universities now that used to be technical colleges, which actually still should be. Now, here are some of the stupid degrees that students are paying $9.5 grand a year for: football studies, bakery and patisserie technology, live events and festival production, dance, urban practice, stop motion animation and puppet making, whatever that means. And let me throw a couple of my own in: contemporary circus and surfing technology.
It is important to say, Carol, these are recognised degrees, and if students want to study them, they can.
Stupid degrees.
And students overall who graduate from degrees are more likely to be employed than
if you want to do bakery and patisserie, go and work in a bakery. Yeah. If you want to do contemporary circus, go join a circus. Don't land yourself with a 50 grand debt, and don't take a place up at university to do it.
I'm loath to say I agree with Carol. So
hello.
I'm going to say I agree with Michelle, agreeing with Carol.
You're hot.
And I think
Can I just quickly check who's got a degree?
Yeah.
Well, everyone.
I've got a master's.
You and I.
Yeah, I haven't got a degree. I was just interested.
Well, so what else? I think the mistake was made in the Tony Blair era, where he had this ambition, if you remember. He said everyone needs to go to education, and everyone needs to go to university. But the thing is, the natural law of economics kicks in. Once you increase supply to saturation point, you end up diminishing the quality of the product. When everyone's got a degree, it's not worth as much because it's not a commodity anymore. It's not a rarity. And so I don't read into what you're saying that you're in any way understating the importance of intellectual pursuit.
No,
you're not. You're saying that what shouldn't happen is we shouldn't devalue that, because what happened to you will stop happening if we end up offering degrees in those sorts of subjects.
I don't think it is, because I mean, things like football studies, right? I know the people who deliver that. I was chairman of the FA. It was a very interesting
doesn't have to be a degree,
course, a very interesting 3-year course. I think you're being snobbish when you think they've got to study philosophy.
The focus should be on the people. For years, the government has focused on university students. The focus should be on people who choose not to go and the things that they choose to do instead of that.
I think a lot of this is actually about schools. I think your point was really interesting, Michelle. But the kids who are studying football studies, I wouldn't knock a degree that's not traditional like that. But I would question, what does someone think they're going to get out of it? And the reason I think a lot of young people are being set up is that they're going and paying now a phenomenal amount. I paid £1,000 a year for my university tuition. Now it's £9,000 a year, and it's going to increase. They're paying a phenomenal amount, being saddled with lifelong debts for things that they're not clear about. They're not clear where it's going to take them. And a lot of that is about the career guidance we offer in schools is shockingly bad. We've had report after report. Young people are not being equipped to make good choices, and a choice that they should have is a path to vocational training, which we currently have never got right in this country. So I agree with you, Carol, that I think that should be an option. But I think it's important to separate these things. People who want a vocation should have a non-university option to getting a high-quality vocational training. People who want the intellectual pursuit of a degree, and that can be a force for social mobility. It's not just a kind of intellectual, a holiday for the elite. It should be something that working class kids can do and that can change their lives, and that should be an option for those who want it, knowing the cost and knowing where it will take them.
There is a snobbery against people who don't go to university and don't have degrees. Now, I've been accompanied with people who say, I'm just an electrician, or I'm just a shop worker, and it makes me...
But part of this is also companies like, for example, Penguin now are employing people who don't have degrees on professional paths. You shouldn't have to have a degree
certain city firms are beginning to do that.
Well, when I first went into journalism, you could get into journalism with 5, what were then, GCEs.
Yeah.
You really could. Now you need a degree.
Yeah.
And Greg,
but you've also got to accept that, I mean, this year I think is the highest percentage ever to go to university. It's 49% of people who could go who are going. And I don't think that's going to change, if you want my honest opinion. I think kids want to go, and I think their parents have now got the aspiration.
It might change if massive corporates start offering what Afua just said, start offering jobs like they used to without stipulating that a degree is a condition. Now, there's one or two banks and consultancy firms have started, I think Penguin, you said, have started that as well, but they need to advertise that, degree not necessary, so people realise the culture is beginning to change.
It will be interesting. Are they going back to 5 GCSEs?
Last thing, because what you said about having enjoyed your university, judging by your age,
yes. He's still alive.
I imagine it was free when you went.
Yes.
Oh, yes.
You probably got
and
a
that's the
grant
difference.
even.
Yes, I got a good fee. I got a whole
imagine?
grant. Yes.
But
I don't think it's healthy for our culture to encourage young people to begin their lives £50,000.
Can I just bring Jeremy Corbyn in on that point, please, because he has spoken directly about it.
We are determined to make sure that those in this country that go to university, and we all benefit from the skills that they develop in university, don't end up saddled with massive debts for the future.
And I think that is an important point, but needs to be taken in the round of the idea that we need to change our thinking about degrees. Those who want degrees should not be saddled with these kind of
we shouldn't be listening to
debts.
Jeremy Corbyn, who promised students lots of things before.
No, he's still promising them.
But yeah, and in fact, but you know, we have to get ready for what's coming. You know, the former mayor of New York, Michael Bloomberg, he said technology is soon going to take thousands of middle-class jobs, and he said that very soon the average plumber is going to have a brighter future than the average college graduate. So it's what it plays to your point of saying when everyone has one, they're not so important anymore.
Is right, because I've got a recruitment company and I speak to employers all the time and to employees, they want a degree, but they want it often as a filtering mechanism to help them. Right? Okay, you know, they're sifting through so many applications for the jobs, and jobs that to your point as well, that you never needed a degree for. Now they recommend, I want this degree. But that needs to change with employer mentality.
But it's interesting. There was a survey came out recently that said lots of employers now would rather have people who've had 3 years experience in the workplace than people straight from university. Because they see the point.
Going to rumble on, and I look forward to it. But it's time now for this. Former UKIP leader Henry Bolton isn't exactly known for holding back. Whether it's claims of being able to strangle a badger or describing racist texts sent by girlfriend Jo Marnie as fiery. But this week he went even further when asked about his reaction to the press coverage of his personal life.
It's a private matter, and actually it needs to be dealt with private. I understand the scrutiny, I understand the public interest, but this has been going on for 6 weeks. There's probably been nothing like that since the Profumo affair or Diane and Dodi Fayed.
I give you the new Princess Diana.
He flatters himself, doesn't he?
Well, he's not a leader anymore, is he?
No, Profumo was far more interesting than him. I mean, far more.
And for that, Mr. Bolton, you get our Straight Talker of the Week. That's all we've got time for this week. But don't forget, you can find The Pledge on Facebook and Twitter to join in the debate. Thank you for watching.